From Washington, this is VOA News. Coming up, the latest on the downed Malaysian airliner in eastern Ukraine. Top U.S. diplomat in Cairo to push a ceasefire in Gaza. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Norman. Witnesses are saying the pro-Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine have handed over to Malaysian experts the flight data recorders from that downed Malaysian airliner. Transfer occurred late Monday at the meeting in the eastern Ukrainian city of Donetsk. It came just hours after Malaysian Prime Minister Razak spoke by telephone with the rebel leader Alexander Borodai. Earlier on Monday, the United Nations Security Council unanimously passed a resolution condemning the downing of the passenger jet that killed 298 people aboard. The resolution also demanded that pro-Russian separatists controlling the crash site allow investigators unrestricted access to the area. President Obama spoke Monday with reporters about the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17.
It's now been 4 days since Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine. Over the last several days, our hearts have been absolutely broken as we've learned more about the extraordinary and beautiful lives that were lost. Men, women, and children, and infants who were killed so suddenly and so senselessly.
European leaders said Monday they were ready to increase sanctions on Russia to force Moscow to use its influence over the rebels to stop the conflict and allow international investigators full, not just limited, access to the crash site. Palestinian officials say more than 570 Gaza residents, most of them civilians, have been killed in Israeli attacks. Israel's military death toll stood at 25 late Monday, with scores more wounded in the deadliest Gaza fighting in 5 years. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is making every effort to avoid civilian casualties, but said Hamas is to blame as long as it continues its rocket attacks on Israel. Israel began a ground offensive in Gaza late Thursday after airstrikes failed to stop Hamas cross-border rocket attacks. Meantime, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in Cairo for talks with Egyptian leaders, other senior officials on ways to end the fighting in Gaza. That story from VOA's Scott Stearns.
In an interview with ABC television before leaving Washington, Kerry said Hamas needs to be part of a solution by accepting a ceasefire.
Hamas has to understand you can't just sit there and claim a moral rectitude or the higher ground while you're busy rocketing people and capturing people and digging tunnels to attack them, and this has to stop.
Secretary Kerry led 9 months of talks on a two-state solution that ended in April without agreement. His task here in Cairo is considerably more difficult than 2 years ago, when former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood negotiated the last ceasefire. Egypt's new leader, the former General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, is far less sympathetic to Hamas. Scott Stearns, VOA News, Cairo.
Nigerian officials says more than 15,000 people have fled an area in the country's northeast after an attack by the Islamic group Boko Haram. Spokesperson for the National Emergency Management Agency said the civilians escaped from the town of Damboa and from surrounding villages over the last several days. Residents in Damboa say militants entered the town on Friday, killing scores of people, burning homes. The exact death toll not known. A trip to Venezuela by Chinese President Xi Jinping has renewed ties between the countries. China has provided tens of billions of dollars in credits to Venezuela, guaranteed by oil supplies, with China being Venezuela's second largest market for oil. Trade partners aim to increase exports in the coming years. Venezuela's local opposition used the Chinese president's visit as a rallying cry to demand more transparency. A survey by key U.S. business leaders says sales and employment grew in April, May, and June after the economy faltered at the beginning of the year. The National Association for Business Economics is made up of economic experts who work in companies across the nation. Most respondents said sales were growing during the second quarter.
That's the latest world news from VOA.